Conspiracy, secrecy, intrigue, all of these words define a World Cup final that's been discussed and written about forever. But the echoes of the fallout still ring across the world. This is the story of a mystery that just won't go away. This is the story of the 1998 World Cup final. Columns after columns have been written about what happened before that fateful day. But why? What happened before the final of the 16th edition of the biggest tournament in football? What was so different here? But before we get there, we need to know how we got there. The context around the final, if you will. Brazil were the 4 times champions coming into the tournament and clear favorites having won the previous edition. They had a good mix of young and seasoned players like a 24-year-old Ronaldo, a 25-year-old Roberto Carlos, one of the greatest right-backs ever, Cafu, centre-back Aldair, and the 1994 World Cup winning captain who was still captaining the side, Dunga. They were managed by the legendary Mario Zagallo, who was involved in all of their 4 previous World Cup triumphs, 1958 and 1962 as a player, 1970 as a manager, and 1994 as an assistant manager. However, maybe the most important player, and maybe the most important personality on this team was the young 21-year-old talent who was considered one of the most prolific and gifted strikers of his time, Ronaldo. In fact, the whole of Brazil's expectations laid on the shoulders of a young Ronaldo despite having a star-studded lineup. To say that Brazil were the favorites for the World Cup would be an understatement. On the other side were France, the host of the 1998 World Cup. A very gifted team in its own right, the French team was captained by the current French coach Didier Deschamps and had prolific players like the enigmatic Zinedine Zidane, Emmanuel Petit, Lilian Thuram, Patrick Vieira, Robert Pires, and also selected some young prospects like David Trezeguet and Thierry Henry. However, there was still a huge gap between the two, namely that while Brazil was a 4-time world champion, France had never even made it to the final of a World Cup, let alone win one. In fact, they hadn't even qualified for the last 2 editions of the World Cup and qualified for the 1998 edition only because they were the host. Their best performances in World Cup before this were 3rd place finishes in 1958 and 1986. Brazil's route to the final was slightly bumpier than it was thought to be. They won their first 2 games in the group stage against Scotland 2-1 and Morocco 3-0 and were already confirmed group winners even before taking on Norway in the 3rd group game. They did lose to Norway 2-1, but they came back with a vengeance as they swatted away their South American neighbors Chile 4-1 in the round of 16. The quarterfinals against Denmark proved to be a much closer and exciting affair as at one point both teams were locked in at 2-2 after 50 minutes. But a Ronaldo goal at the 59th minute mark settled it and Brazil made it to the semi-finals against Netherlands, who were coming off a close victory against Argentina. The semi-final proved to be a humdinger as Brazil and Netherlands couldn't be separated after 120 minutes of football, both going into penalty shootout where Brazil beat Netherlands 4-2 when Brazil's goalkeeper Claudio Taffarel saved penalties from Cocu and De Boer. Ronaldo was instrumental in Brazil reaching the World Cup final, scoring 4 goals which included a brace against Chile. He also scored against Netherlands in the semi-final while also coolly finishing his penalty in the penalty shootout. France, on the other hand, dominated their group, beating South Africa 3-0 and then Saudi Arabia 4-0. Henry scored a goal against South Africa and twice against Saudi Arabia, providing a glimpse into the future of then 20-year-old prodigy. France went into the final group match with as many as 8 changes and beat Denmark 2-1 in a closely fought match. The round of 16 saw France struggle against Paraguay. The match was called a real stinker by Richard Williams of The Guardian as the match remained goalless after 90 minutes. With 6 minutes of extra time remaining, Laurent Blanc scored the first golden goal of the FIFA World Cup ever, securing the passage to the quarterfinals where they met the 1994 World Cup finalists Italy. In what proved to be another drab affair, France and Italy remained deadlocked 0-0 through the regular as well as added time, and the match was eventually settled in a penalty shootout that France won 4-3. In the semi-final, France beat Croatia 2-1 thanks to a thorough embrace. But they did lose Laurent Blanc to a red card due to a challenge on Bilic. This proved to be his only red card in his entire career. Bilic's reaction implied that Blanc had struck him on the head in the incident, but video replays showed that the impact had been on his chest or chin, and the incident is often cited as one of the most controversial in the competition's history. Nevertheless, France has made it to their first ever World Cup final. So here we were. Brazil versus France, a four-time world champion and the current defending champion versus the first-time finalist. Brazil were considered the favorites by the bookies, and for a good reason. But even before the final could happen, things went awry. Now before we proceed, it's imperative for us to tell why there was this much emphasis on Ronaldo. The then 21-year-old Inter Milan player wasn't just a prodigy who was showing potential. He was already one of the best in the world. By the 1998 World Cup, he had already been named FIFA World Player of the Year twice and was coming off a 34-goal debut season with Inter Milan. He was saddled with the burden of carrying the hopes of entire nation of Brazil, and so far he had not only persevered but was thriving under that pressure. So what happened next left everyone flabbergasted. The day was 12th of July 1998. The location was Paris, more precisely Stade de France, where the World Cup final was about to be played. Renowned BBC commentator John Motson recalled to CNN, "The team sheets were handed around by the stewards as usual. Lo and behold, Ronaldo's name was not there, and everybody looking at the handout had the same reaction. There were people standing up and waving and asking what was going on. We sat there in an absolute ferment for quite a long time." It was a bombshell revelation on the day of the biggest match of the tournament and maybe the career of everyone involved. The thought of Ronaldo not playing the biggest match of his own career was unfathomable, especially to the Brazilian fans. To compare to football today, imagine Argentina going into the 2022 FIFA World Cup final without their talisman Messi. Motson said, "My reporting colleague, Ray Stubbs, saw Pelé sitting in the commentary box. He ran down and asked him what it was all about. Pelé just spread his hands and said he knew nothing." It was total confusion as nothing of Ronaldo's condition was revealed. What was going on? Speculations were rife, and everybody, the Brazilian fans, the French fans, and everyone in between were trying to make sense of things when things changed again. This time in form of an amended team sheet. And well, Ronaldo was back on. The question, however, remained. What was going on? Was it a Brazilian ploy to bamboozle their opponents? Was there something more serious afoot? From 7:48 p.m. local time, when the first team sheet was revealed without Ronaldo, to 8:18 p.m. when the modified team sheet with Ronaldo's name reinstated, there was bedlam. Former England striker Gary Lineker, who was part of the broadcast team, described it as quote-unquote the biggest wind-up in World Cup football history. But the thing was, there were clues all around that things were not normal, that something was terribly wrong. One of the biggest signs of things having gone awry was the absence of the Brazilian team for the pre-match warm-up routine. Motson added, "I always remember that because it was most unusual for a team not to come out and do some exercising." There was obviously quite a lot of things going on in the Brazilian dressing room which we weren't party to. Amidst all the confusion and chaos, the match went ahead, and Ronaldo was part of it. Well, to be honest, the biggest match of the tournament ended with a whimper. France obliterated Brazil 3-0 with the help of Zidane's brace. In fact, at no point did it feel like Brazil were in the match, and Ronaldo, their talisman, had one of his quietest days on the pitch. Brazil crashed to their heaviest defeat in 68 years of World Cup. France, on the other hand, won their first ever World Cup. And if it wasn't for the stuff that had happened leading up to the match, this would have been all about France and Zidane and how good of a World Cup campaign they had. But as we know, the match on the pitch was overshadowed by the happenings off the pitch. And through all of this, the question remained, what really happened? It turned out Ronaldo had suffered a quote-unquote mysterious seizure before the match and had to be rushed to the hospital and thus was taken off the team sheet, only to then miraculously recover and put back on the team, only to then underperform as he looked completely out of sorts and off throughout the match. In fact, Edmundo, who only played the last 17 minutes of the final, had more touches than Ronaldo had the entire game. But this only added to the mystery of the situation. What happened to Ronaldo? Why did a fit 21-year-old boy suddenly have a seizure? What were they not telling us? As it always happens in absence of clear answers, rumors and conspiracy theories start filling up the blanks, and this was no different. The public were desperate for answers, and allegations of corruption and foul play were rampant. But no one was more desperate for answers than the country of Brazil. So much so that Brazil's National Congress set up a whole inquiry and hearing into the matter. But before we go ahead with them, it's imperative we look back at some of the most popular conspiracy theories that this saga brought forth. There is no conspiracy theory peddled more than the meddling by Nike. Nike and Brazil Football Confederation, or CBF, had entered an agreement worth $160 million in 1996. It was the largest sponsorship deal with a national team. But this also sowed the seed of distrust against the company. Was it Nike who asked the team to include Ronaldo against medical advice? Nike were the perfect scapegoat too, because many people feared that big money was changing the game. To them, it wasn't far-fetched that a quote-unquote big evil foreign corporation would do something like that they will force Ronaldo to play against all common sense. It did not help that players like Edmundo, who was supposed to play ahead of Ronaldo before the team sheet changed, and Leonardo made leading comments about Nike's role in all of this. Edmundo went as far as to say, quote, Nike's people were there 24 hours a day, as if they were a member of the technical staff. It's a huge power, that's all I can say. In fact, the parliamentary inquiry's primary motive was to establish if there was any truth in the Nike conspiracy, but nothing came of it. The other big conspiracy theory was that Brazilian football team was bribed to lose. The theory goes that Brazil's player received a total of $23 million in bribes, the promise of Brazil hosting the 2006 World Cup, and an easy passage in the 2002 World Cup to throw the game. It gets even more outlandish as the theory further elaborates that Ronaldo did not want to be part of it. So Edmundo was going to start ahead of him, but Nike threw their weight around and Ronaldo was forced to play. The idea was for Brazil to lose in a thrilling final by the golden goal, but Brazil team was shaken by the deal and France were unaware, so they scored 3. There are other less popular conspiracy theories, like Ronaldo was drugged on the day and it was a sabotage planned by France. There were also talks of a mystery medic somewhere. Some players claimed that team doctor Lidia Toledo started weeping when he arrived at Ronaldo's room. Toledo denied this, claiming Ronaldo was conscious when he reached him, but breathing heavily and with saliva all around his mouth. Another theory, which we would say is even more outlandish, says that there was a scandal and Ronaldo's breakdown was prompted by an affair between his then girlfriend and a Brazilian TV journalist. The investigation into the matter by Brazil's National Congress provided a lot of insight into what happened. On the day, the squad had lunch at the Chateau de Grand Hermain in Lusigny near Paris, then went back to their rooms. Ronaldo was with Roberto Carlos, with Edmundo and Doriva in the adjoining room. Suddenly, Ronaldo starting to have a fit. His entire body convulsed. he frothed at the mouth and began to shake uncontrollably. Roberto Carlos, overwhelmed by panic, started screaming for help. Edmundo told Congress, "When I saw what it was, I despaired, because it was a really strong and shocking scene." He ran through the hotel, hitting on all the doors and shouting for everyone to come. Cesar Sampaio, the defender, was the first to provide first aid. He reached Ronaldo before the doctors arrived, and with Edmundo restraining him, placed his hand in Ronaldo's mouth to free his tongue and stop him from swallowing it. Ronaldo subsequently fell asleep. According to Edmundo, the team doctors concluded that the best approach upon his waking up was to act as though nothing had occurred. He added, quote, "We went back to our rooms, we rested, but you know what I mean. Everyone was worried. My room was linked, so I saw everything. Every 5 minutes someone came and stared, and Ronaldo was there, sleeping like a baby." Years later, Ronaldo corroborated some of it. In an interview with 442 Film, he said, "I decided to get some rest after lunch, and the last thing I remember was going to bed. After that, I had a convulsion. I was surrounded by players, and the late Dr. Lydia Toledo was there. They did not want to tell me what was going on. I asked if they could leave and go talk somewhere else because I wanted to sleep. Then Leonardo asked me to go for a walk in the garden in the hotel where we were staying and explain the whole situation. I was told that I wouldn't play in the World Cup final." Ronaldo woke up and went for tea, but he seemed subdued. Leonardo, visibly upset, urged that Ronaldo be informed about what had transpired. The doctors delivered the news and mentioned that he would need to undergo tests. He could only play in the final if the tests yielded positive results. While the team boarded the coach to Stade de France, Ronaldo went to Lilas Clinic in Paris instead. Just 40 minutes before the kickoff, he arrived with the all clear, insisting he was ready to play. Zagallo stated, "Faced with his reaction, I chose Ronaldo." Now, was it his being chosen that caused Brazil to lose? Absolutely not. I think it was the collective trauma created by the atmosphere of what had happened. Ronaldo corroborated this as well, saying, "But all the essential medical exams did not show anything was abnormal. It was like nothing had happened. After that, we went to the stadium with a message from Zagallo saying that I would not play. I had test results in my hand, with Dr. Toledo giving the green light. I approached Zagallo at the stadium and said, 'I'm fine, I'm not feeling anything. Here are the test results. They're fine, I want to play.' I did not give him an alternative. He had no choice and accepted my decision. Then I played, and maybe I affected the whole team because that convulsion was certainly something very scary. It's not something you see every day. In any case, I had a duty to my country and I did not want to miss it. I had my honor and felt that I could play. Obviously, it wasn't one of the best matches in my career, but I was there to fulfill my role." To this date, despite all the inquiries that proved no maleficence, and Ronaldo himself detailing what he remembers about that day and rubbishing the conspiracy theories, message boards and comment sections run rampant with those conspiracy theories. For Ronaldo, living down that day was not easy, especially in a country where football was a religion. According to his family and friends at the time, an angry and depressed Ronaldo fled to the United States in secret, apparently to play the casinos of Las Vegas before belatedly returning to Inter Milan later that month. In his only public statement at the time, Ronaldo told Globo Television, "I'm not yellow, I'm not coward," seemingly having aged 10 years in the month of July of 1998. Despite all the post-mortem of the situation, the most acceptable theory is that Ronaldo, who did carry a knee issue at the time and was severely stressed out and was playing out of his skin, it all came to boil just before the final. But in the day where conspiracies make the world go round, will the world ever accept it? At least Ronaldo got his redemption arc 4 years later when he led Brazil to the fabled World Cup triumph, scoring his own brace, making it a full circle moment. Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it, share if you found it worthy, and subscribe for more content like this. This is Salty Football.